Hello, everyone. I'm Linda Nickell, and welcome to the Happiness Hour. Every Wednesday, photographers from all over the country meet here to connect, inspire, and create. My guests are sharing their photographs, the stories behind the scenes, and they're inspiring us to improve our own photography skills. The schedule for upcoming presentations is on my website at lindanickell.com. And if you miss a session, you can catch it on the Happiness Hour YouTube channel. Tonight's guest is Beth Mancuso. Beth is a travel and landscape photographer based in Minnesota. Her work has been featured by Sony, Lensbaby, and Takina, among many other photography credits. As a workshop and photography instructor, Beth leads workshops all over the world. She is also the founder of a female photography group called Women's Photography Circle that you can find on Instagram and on Facebook. But in tonight's presentation, editing landscapes with Adobe Camera Raw or Lightroom, Beth will talk about HDR, panoramas, adding light, masking, and a whole lot more. If you're on Instagram, look for her at intothewild.wego. That's intothewild.wego. And on her website at intothewildwego.photography. Welcome to the Happiness Hour, Beth.
Thank you for having me. This is so exciting. That was quite the introduction.
Well, thank you for coming. And so I haven't, make sure I gave out your correct website because I got thrown off with, is there a .com? But there's not.
I know everybody gets thrown off by that. No, it's Into the Wild. We go .photography instead of .com.
I just wanted to make sure that did I write that down wrong? So a little bit of disclosure. So I met Beth I've never met her in person. I met her through the Women's Photography Circle. And so Beth has started Facebook pages for just about every state. And I happen to help out with the Texas page. So that's kind of how we know each other. But I know that through just following her, she leads workshops like lots of different places. I want to say all of them are predominantly for women. They're women retreats, right? So
correct.
Yeah. So guys, that doesn't mean we're not here to exclude you. It's just you can't come to some of the cool meetings that we have. But all right, with that, Beth, if I skipped anything, this is your opportunity to fill in your bio or let people know what you're doing. And I'll just turn over the mic to you.
Sure. I think you did a pretty good, accurate description there. I do lead workshops throughout the United States and in Iceland. I do one-day workshops that are co-ed, but those are usually Midwest based. And then I do teach online as well. And I'll share some of those links kind of when we're wrapping up, I think. To give you guys just a little bit of background about me, I'm actually a portrait photographer turned landscape photographer, which you don't hear happening too often. I had a portrait business for a decade before I lost interest in that. So now I do landscapes and travel photography, and it's much more rewarding, I think. But I want to talk just a little bit about editing in Adobe Camera Raw or Lightroom. Now, I use Adobe Camera Raw because I started in Photoshop many, many moons ago before Lightroom had the capabilities that it does now. Adobe Camera Raw is almost nearly identical to Lightroom. So I'm going to open it up and you're going to see it. I know a lot of you are probably Lightroom users, but it looks almost exactly the same. It's nearly identical interface. It's made by Adobe as well. It's just it works with Photoshop to edit the raw files, and then it imports them directly into Photoshop as JPEGs. So I've been using that, but anything that I do today will follow over to Lightroom. So just keep that in mind. It might look just a tiny bit different, but all the same features. So I'm going to start here. I'm just going to jump into an image. So this is Adobe Bridge for those of you that have never seen it before. This is what I use to catalog my images instead of Lightroom. And I'm just right-clicking on this and hitting Open in Camera Raw. So now this is going to take me, hold on, I gotta get some of the stuff out of the way. This is going to take me into Adobe Camera Raw. No, I want that big. Okay, there we go. And you can see over here, we have our sliders and familiar tools, crop, spot, mask, all of that stuff that most of you are probably familiar with using in Lightroom. Now, when I first started editing photos, I maybe did about 10% of my editing in Adobe Camera Raw. And, that was, gosh, 12 years ago now. So it was a long time ago. But now, with how advanced it's gotten with the masking capabilities, I would say I probably do about 40% of my editing now in Adobe Camera Raw before I bring it into Photoshop. So there's just really so much more that you can do here. And so I thought it'd be an interesting topic for you guys to just kind of see my workflow and how I do that. So I'm just going to hop into editing this. This is an image I shot at Glacier National Park. If I've ever been there, it's amazing. And I'm going to go ahead and just start by bringing up the shadows so we can see what we're working with. I should preface this by saying if you're not shooting in RAW, you should be. You have far more digital information of your files when you shoot in RAW. When you shoot in JPEG, you don't. I learned this mistake the hard way. I went to Glacier. I think it was my first trip, and I had just started landscape photography and I shot in JPEG to save room. And I really, really regretted that. All right, so I've got my shadows brought up. Now we can kind of see this image a little bit better. When I'm teaching editing to people, I like to have them look at an image in parts. So instead of looking at this image and saying, hey, I'm going to globally adjust, I'm going to bring my exposure up and do my whole image, I want you to break it down into parts. And because we have all these masking capabilities over here now, we can do that much easier. So when I'm looking at this, I'm going to look at the different parts and I'm going to edit all those parts individually. I'm not going to do a lot of global tweaks to the whole image. So when I look at this one, I look, hey, I've got a sky. I'm going to edit that separately. I'm probably going to edit these mountains separately. And I'm definitely going to edit this water on its own. So let's go ahead and let's start with the sky. So this little circle here is the masking tool. And we've got these little buttons here. I'm just going to click the one that says sky. And we can see it did a really good job of selecting the sky. I can see there's a little bit of red on the mountains. If I wanted to subtract that, I would just hit subtract and I could grab a brush. That is a big brush. And just subtract some of it from those tips. I'm not worried too much about perfection here because I'm just trying to demonstrate. So there we've got the sky selected. And one of the things I know I want to do with this is I want to change the colors of it. I want to make it more of a vibrant sky and maybe a little bit warmer. So I'm going to start by just bringing my temperature up, adding in the yellow, and then I can also add in some magenta. So now I've made it more look like kind of a sunset sky, which it was. And then scroll down and just add in some saturation. Now, one of the other things that I like to play with a lot with skies, I don't know if it's going to work well with this particular one, but we'll give it a try, is adding just a little bit of dehaze. So you can see when you do that, it really adds contrast and definition to your clouds. I think we can add just a little bit. Looks pretty good. All right, now it's bothering me just a little bit that this is a little bit crooked. We're just going to go ahead and straighten it with my crop tool. All right. And right over here, we have a little person. So we're going to try to use the spot removal tool here to get rid of them. Good enough. Okay. So now let's edit the water. Now I can do this two ways. I can hit select sky again. And then hit this box here with the circle and invert it. So now it's got my mountains and my water selected. And I think I'm going to be okay with that. We'll edit, and if I change my mind, I can always come over here and subtract the mountains from it. So one of the things that I like to do to make water pop is to increase the whites. So you can see that that's really bringing life to the image. And I know I want to increase the colors down here. You can see the beautiful colors of the rocks. So I can just go ahead and boost the saturation. And then I can also play with the temperature of it. Like it looks a little yellow. So I'm going to add in just a little bit of blue. And there we go. What I don't like is now my mountains are turning blue. So we're going to edit those separately. I'm going to go ahead and bring the blacks up just a little bit so we can see more of those rocks. All right, so now let's tackle these mountains. Let's do that with a brush. So I've got my brush selected here, and I'm just going to kind of paint over this area. Now, if I were doing this for real, I'd probably do it with a little more precision, but we're just going to do the best we can here. And now I can edit my mountains. So let's go ahead and just add in a little bit of contrast to them because I think they need some contrast. And then I didn't like how they turned yellow with my water adjustment. So, or blue, I'm sorry. So I'm going to add in some yellow and maybe a little bit of magenta. And then I can also tweak the blacks to add in a little bit more contrast there. Now, the only thing I don't like with what I've done so far is because I brightened all of this, it's all pretty bright. And normally you kind of want a little bit of a vignette on your image just so it kind of draws the viewer in. And so I'm going to go ahead now and create a vignette with well, here we can, let's try this way first. So we can come down here to effects and we can do the vignette that way. So I'm not liking that. So we're going to come back to our masking tool and we are going to do a brush. And I really just want that vignette to be on the water down here. So then I would just bring the exposure down just a little bit. And that looks pretty good. Let's take a look at what we did, where we started at, and then where we wound up. I edit for color. I like color, so you're going to see that with my edits. But you can see just breaking this down into parts, we were able to kind of create different colors and depth instead of just globally dragging the sliders. How am I doing? Do we have any questions on that one?
No, I don't think so.
Okay.
Good.
All right, this is Badlands National Park. If you've never been there, I highly recommend it. It's absolutely one of my favorite parks to shoot landscapes in. I'm going to go ahead and just straighten this from the get-go because it's crooked. Okay. Awesome. So now I'm just going to go ahead and I always just lift the shadows. Now, when you do this, you can, you lose the contrast in your image, right? But you can always add it back in. And so I like to just lift the shadows just so I can kind of see what I have there and what I'm working with. When I shoot landscapes, I'm generally underexposing by a half stop to a full stop, just so that I can retain colors and the sky. So usually I have to bring shadows up. So this one's going to be a pretty simple edit, but I just want to show you how quick and easy that can be. I'm going to go ahead and get rid of this spot because it's going to bug me. Okay. All right, so let's start with the sky on this one again. Again, we're going to break this one down into parts. Sky and then land. All right. And let's just kind of add a little saturation to that. We can try warming it up and see if we like that. I like a little bit of warmth. All right, let's try a dehaze, just a tiny bit. Okay, Okay, now I can go and hit select sky again, and then select the inverse. And now I can edit my landscape. Now I know I want to bring the whites up on this. You're going to just see this image come to life when I do that. So now I've brought up the lights in here, but I want to go ahead back and add some contrast back into this. And warm it up just a smidge.
Well, while you're doing that, Beth, let me ask you a real quick question. It's just so that we don't lose somebody. Karina is asking, did you say overexpose or underexpose for landscapes? And was that by her?
Yeah, I underexpose for landscapes. It's if you've shot portraits, it's usually the opposite. You usually overexpose. So kind of a different way of thinking, because you don't ever want to blow the sky when you're out shooting landscapes. And so I usually intentionally underexpose a little bit, or I bracket, and I'll go over a bracketing shot with you guys here in just a moment.
Thank you.
Yeah. All right, I'm going to continue and just add a little bit more light with the exposure. And then I want to go ahead and grab a mask and do a radial gradient kind of right in the middle here. I just want to add a little bit more light to this because it's kind of like your eye kind of follows it through the frame. And I think it would look, we added just a little bit more light and maybe some contrast to that area. And then I want to add just another one right over here. Now this is how you edit in sections. This part is a lot darker, and that's just because of the way that the light was, but I want to bring it to life just a little bit more. There we go. And then I would probably just do a general vibrance boost on this whole image, and that was a pretty quick edit that took me, maybe 5 minutes. I don't know. There's the before and there's the after. And really, with an image like this, there isn't too much more I would do to it. I would still bring it into Photoshop and do some dodging and burning just to really bring out the striations and the rocks. But really, I accomplished most what I wanted to do right here in Adobe Camera Raw. So that's exciting. Let me make sure my screen turned all the way up. That would probably be helpful for you guys. Okay.
So let me ask you a question while we're right here. Ariel's curious, why do you move shadows versus blacks? She's just curious.
That's a great question. So let's go back and let's look at this. We'll just reset to default. So if I do the blacks, what happens is you get this washed out look versus the shadows doesn't quite give you that same washed out effect. Now, there are times where I will lift both, and I will show you an example of that, but I always start with the shadows. And then if I still need to add, if I still want to brighten it up some more, I will lift the blacks too, but I always start with the shadows. So I think it looks a little more natural. All right. So let's go over how you do a HDR. So here I have 4 different shots. This was done with bracketing. So basically you change the exposure value by a certain amount of stops. I'm not sure exactly what it was here. A lot of times I'm just dialing on my dial and not using the actual bracketing mode, so it's not very scientific. But the reason that you do this is that you get the high dynamic range within your image. Because if I was just exposing for the sky, if you look at this image, you can see with the proper exposure for the sky, that left my landscape really dark. But now I have this other shot of my landscape that I can merge with it. So I'm going to select all 4 of these, and then I'm right-clicking and hitting Open in Camera Raw. So now we have our images here and got my first one selected. You can tell because it's got the box around it. And then I'm just going to hit Command A on my keyboard. I'm on a Mac. If you're on a PC, it's Control A. And so now all 4 of the files are selected. And then I right click on it. And then you got these little options here. And I select Merge to HDR. And now it's going to smush them all together. Takes a moment. All right, and you'll get a little pop-up box here. It's going to be your preview. You've got options here. Align images, you want that selected. Apply auto settings. I usually leave this on, but you can turn it off and take a look at what it does. But usually it's just doing some basic editing for you already. And sometimes it does an okay job. And then deghost, I usually just leave at low. So I'm going to go ahead and hit merge now. And what it's going to do is it's going to create a DNG file. And it's asking me what I want to save it as and where. I'm just going to hit save. And so now we have our file here. And now we can work on this file. My sensor was really dirty for this shoot. Holy smokes. Okay. I'm probably not going to get rid of all of these. But now you can see we have an image where we have the full dynamic range. And it's beautiful to be able to see all of that. So you can see here, now this is where those were those auto settings where I clicked that little box. Now I would go a little bit further and bring my shadows up even more because I thought that this was just a little too dark. I think this area is a little too bright. So let's see what happens if we bring our highlights down. No, okay. I think now, a lot of times when I work with water, I'll do a linear gradient, which you just pull from the bottom up. But over here, I don't want that to be affected. So my options here are to do a radial or a brush. A brush would be best, but to save time, we're going to just do a radial gradient. For some reason, whenever I do brushes, my computer is so slow. All right, so we got most of the area covered. And I could always come in and subtract some of this if I wanted to. I'm not too worried about it. But I'm going to go ahead and just bring the exposure down just a little bit here. And then maybe add in some more warmth with my temperature sliders down here. All right, now let's go back to our main panel here. And let's take a look at curves. So you have curves in Photoshop, but you also have them here in Adobe Camera Raw and Lightroom. Usually when I do curve work, I do it in Photoshop just because then I have the ability to add a mask to it. But it is a nice feature to use and to know about. So I thought I'd just show you guys it here. So this main curve line here is showing you your histogram of your image. And darks are going to be on this side and lights are on this side. And when you click on any of these colors, then you have the different colors. So you've got red and cyan, green and magenta, and blue and yellow. So let's just start by making a little adjustment. So I'm just going to do an S curve, which is a popular editing trick where you just bring up your highlights. So I have a little dot that I place there. And then you make another dot in your shadows and you bring down your shadows. Now I'm going to go one more further and show you guys one more trick you can do. If you drag up the bottom left of your curve line, you're going to get that matte kind of film look. I don't use it a ton in my editing, but sometimes I do. Sometimes I think it looks nice. So that's kind of neat to know that that's there. And I actually like a little bit of it on this. So I'm going to keep that. But then I could also go in here and I could control some of my colors. So let's go into the red and then let's see if I drag up a little bit and see what I get there. just warmed it up just a little bit. So that is your curves. Let me think. I'll go over how to do some of these other color changes in just a moment with a different image. And that's the thing with editing. I feel like there's like 10 ways to do the same thing everywhere you go. So it's kind of neat to know them all, but it's also kind of frustrating, especially when you're just starting to learn. But you can see that, so that's our after image, and you can see, you know, before we had all of these images. So it's quite the difference. Does anybody have any questions on that?
Not specifically on this, but let me slip in some questions. So, well, here comes one. Valerie's going to ask, how are color curves different from using HSL or calibration?
It's just a different way to get there. With curves, I think you have a little bit more control. Let me just go back into that. Because then you do have that visual of the histogram. Whereas if you go into, I think you're talking about the color mixer, right? If you go into here, then you just have the sliders. I mean, you can use the targeted tool. But I think it's just the visual. There's not a ton of difference. You know, you have the ability to maybe add more contrast.
Okay. The answer, Barbara, is I'm pretty sure. Pretty sure she's on a tripod. But Barbara's just confirmed for me. She wants to know, are you using a tripod for your bracketed shots?
Yeah, 90% of the time I am, but sometimes I don't, because sometimes, you know, you're just out there and you're shooting and you want to get the shot and you don't have time to fiddle with the tripod. And so if you hold still enough, I've found that the software is so smart, it still will line those images up for you, as long as there's not too much going on in it.
Okay, we're going to backpedal just a little bit so we can make sure we don't lose anybody. Jan is asking, what tool are you selecting when you edit only a portion or section of the photo?
Sure. So I'm using the masking tool. So it depends kind of on what I'm doing. If you click on the plus button here, you get all these options. A lot of times I'm hitting select sky, or like a radial gradient is just it pops on the screen and you pull it and you drag it to kind of fit it wherever you want. Does that make sense?
I think so.
Okay.
And if not, Jan, just slip in another question. Charlotte wants to know, Charlotte, first of all, we're all rookies. We've all been rookies, so don't feel bad about asking any question that you might think we think is simple. On one of the photos, and I don't know which one she was talking about, how do you, why don't you show her how you pull up the spot remover tool?
Oh, sure. I like that.
She's currently working on a photo that has a bunch of power lines. So,
oh, okay. Power lines and Lightroom or Adobe Camera Raw, it's not your best bet. You're going to want to bring that into Photoshop. I'm not saying it can't be done, but it is this little Band-Aid here. It looks like a Band-Aid, and you just click on it. And what am I on here? Oh, I was on content aware remove. Okay.
Yeah.
It just kind of fills in the spot for you. I found power lines are tricky. Not saying they can't be done in this program, but using like content aware in Photoshop usually does a better job.
I agree with you. So I think someone maybe in the chat answered Ariel's question, but her question was, can you subtract from a linear?
Can you subtract from a linear? That was a good question. Let's try. Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Cool. Very cool. And then Leslie's got a question. where did you say your photos reside before you open them in Camera Raw?
Where do I store them? Is that what she's asking?
Yeah. Mhm.
Okay, I use Adobe Bridge. So if you have the Adobe suite, which most of you do, I'm assuming if you have Lightroom, you also have access to Adobe Bridge and Adobe Photoshop. And Bridge is just, here, we'll close this. It's a cataloging. It's not as smart as like the Lightroom cataloging. So you can't get quite as in depth with how you organize your files. But honestly, I'm like the most unorganized photographer ever. So it works for me. I like make a folder that's like Iceland, 2023, and then I call it good. But I know some people really get into their cataloging. But
I'm on Team Beth here.
yeah.
Adrienne, I don't know that we're going to be able to answer this, but take a stab, Beth. She says sometimes the tool doesn't cover the entire power line or object. What is she doing wrong?
I'm not sure. It's too hard to.
I think that's kind of something.
You might have to like click and drag when you're painting it on, but it would be too hard to answer without seeing what you're doing.
That might be something somebody needs to get on with you, Adrienne. All right, and I think we're caught up. So why don't we go ahead and move on to the next portion or the next?
All right.
I don't want to run out of time, and I don't want to rush you.
What time do you want me to stop? Because I've got a lot of files, so I can just keep talking.
Another 25 minutes.
Okay, sounds good. All right, so let's do a night sky. No, it's really crooked.
You set yourself up for having to come back to do Beth, part 2.
Oh, because I still have all the files. Okay, I'm just going to fix this because it's really crooked. Okay. But let's edit a night sky picture because I think this is kind of one of the more harder things to edit to kind of really make them pop. But you can do quite a bit, I've discovered here now in Adobe Camera Raw or Lightroom. So I'm going to start by just bringing the exposure up on this image so we can see more of those stars. And then I'm going to change the temperature of it. I don't want it to go yellow. I'm going the wrong way. I want more of a blue. And then let's add in a little bit of magenta. Kind of more of like a night sky. I must have had it on out of white balance and it did me wrong there. So we'll fix it that way. One of the things I like to do when I'm editing night skies is again, bring up my whites because the stars are white and that's going to make that image pop that much more. Now you also have some other options here that we haven't talked about yet, like clarity and dehaze, and we can try playing with those. So we do clarity, that adds in a lot more stars. Wow. And then we can dehaze it just a little bit too, and that'll make it pop. And one of the things that's kind of neat that you can do here with a star picture and has the Milky Way is to grab a radial gradient and place it over your Milky Way. And then edit your Milky Way individually from the rest of your stars. So then you can go ahead and crank your whites just a little bit more. You could even bring up the exposure. I like to add in a little bit of contrast, and then also we do some of the dehaze, even adding in a little texture. And then you can also add some color to it too. So if you wanted to maybe warm it up just a little bit so it stands out from the rest of the sky. And then with the night sky, you're going to end up with noise. So detail. that is under detail. By default, this applies sharpening. I think you can turn that off, and a little bit of color noise reduction. So it already has some of that in there. But then I could go in and add, just a little bit. You don't want to go too far with the noise reduction, especially with something like stars, because it kind of starts to get soft looking. But then as far as editing this goes, I would probably boost the vibrance quite a bit just to make it kind of pop and come to life. But we can see that's where we started, and that's where we ended. This big transformation in just a few steps. All right, now we're going to take a look at this fall image, and we're going to try and do some kind of a different kind of editing technique. So again, I'm going to bring my shadows up. Well, that didn't do much for this image. So then let's go ahead and bring our blacks up. Now, what I want to do here with this specific edit is I want to create more of a painterly look and kind of a high key edit. I want it to be bright and colorful and somewhat painterly. So I did just bring my blacks up. Probably would add in just a little bit of contrast back into there like that. And then I'm going to go into my color mixer. Now under here lives hue, saturation, and luminance. Hue is going to control the color of it. So let's just grab maybe the yellows and I'll show you what I mean. So if I slide that, I can change the color of my yellows. I'm going to make my oranges just a little bit more red. And then we also have saturation here, which does just that. This color, this image is pretty darn colorful already. I might saturate my yellows just a little bit. This is in Minnesota, in case you guys are wondering. We have amazing falls. It's the only reason I stay here, I swear. Okay, and then I'm going to go into color grading here. And these are like little wheels, and you kind of drag a point. I'm going to get into my highlights here. You can see that little circle emerged, and you can see when I'm dragging it, it's changing the color of my highlights depending on where I drag it around the wheel. I just wanted to kind of make those colors pop just a little bit. So I'm just going to leave it right there. And now what I want to do to kind of create that painterly look that I was talking about is, all right, so you can do this a couple of ways. I've found even just cranking up your noise reduction adds this kind of soft painterly look to it. And then you can also go and play with texture. So if you go all the way to the left there, it's really going to soften it. This is a great tool. It wasn't introduced not too long ago now. Works wonders on people's skins, but it also can add just a little bit of softness to your image. Let's say you didn't want that sharp image. You want it to look more like a painting. And now I'm going to play around a little bit here with my depth. So let's grab a linear gradient. And I just want to make this outer stuff just a little bit more blurred, just to kind of give it more of an artsy look. So let me drag my texture. And then I could also do some noise reduction to that. And then I want to do another one, because I probably could have just duplicated that, but I'm in it to win it now. I'll do another one over here on this side. And bring my texture down and add in some noise reduction. So sometimes it's fun to look at the tools that you have here and use them in an unconventional way. Like that maybe isn't what that's for, but I still think it yields a pretty result. So let's just do a couple more tweaks on this. I'm just gonna bring up my whites. And that's actually probably all I would do. So let's go ahead and look, that's the before. And that's the after. Much more bright, cheerful image. All right, let's see what else we have here. So one thing I want to show you, just to kind of show you the power of having a raw file. So this was a shot I took in Iceland. It was so windy this day, like there was no tripods. It was crazy. So I was shooting fast, so I didn't bracket, I didn't, use a tripod, and I exposed for the sky because the sky was really pretty. But now my foreground is really dark. Luckily, I shot raw, so I know that I can save this. So if I just go ahead and I bring my shadows up, the whole image just comes to life. Now, one of the other masking features that I haven't shown yet is that this can now select subject and objects. So you can take like a box, I don't see how well this one does, and drag it around. Oh, that did a really good job. Drag it around your object, and then it will select it. Now I also want this fence. Now I wonder what it's going to do. Wonder how it's going to handle that hole in the middle. Oh yeah, I didn't quite get that. That's okay. We'll just leave that. That's really neat to just be able to, oh no, did I just lose that? Select all of my objects there. So then I want to go ahead and I just want to bring the exposure up on these areas. Now, if I were taking the time to edit this, I would probably grab my brush and make sure I got all of the fence here, but for time purposes here, we're just gonna leave it and add in some whites. And then let's say I wanted to accentuate the light behind the church. Well, let's create a radial gradient. Now I can, warm this area up if I want, add in some pinks. And then I've also found if you come and you use the dehaze, but instead of like dehazing, you go the other way, it kind of adds in some light and some, it adds in haze. And so sometimes I think that looks really pretty. So I use that a lot to add in light to my images. So let's go and let's just see if I select my sky. And let's edit that. I'm going to warm it up. In case you guys haven't figured out, I like warmth. And then add in some more saturation. And then I'm going to select the sky again and select the inverse. So I have my whole image selected there. And just bring the exposure and the shadows up on more of this. And then add in some contrast. And then another thing I would probably do to this image, because there is some distortion, is to come to, I always forget, nope, geometry. And then just hit the auto button. There we go. Now it's made my fence line nice and even. So that looks really good. I think it's just really amazing, like the difference of what you can do with a raw file, and how much you can transform things now, especially with the masking tools. They're just so smart. I was going to show you an example of things that you can't do. Somebody was asking about power lines. So here's an image. Oh, nope, I selected all of them. So this is a before and after. I edited this in Adobe Camera Raw and Photoshop. But you can see there was barbed wire going in front of these horses. I use Content Aware to fill this, and it did an amazing job. You know, it's got some hard things that it had to fill there with the horse and the hair, but it did a good job. And then I replaced the sky. And so that's another thing that you can't do in Lightroom or Adobe Camera Raw, but they've made it really easy now. So if you're not using that feature in Photoshop, I definitely recommend checking it out, because it can just totally transform your image.
So Jamie's asking, did you remove the wires in sections, or did you just do it in one big swoop?
No, definitely in sections. So when I did it, like I started here and I removed this wire, and then I would remove like this fence post, and then this wire, and then this wire. Yeah.
I know the answer, but I'm going to let you, since she asked you. Charlotte wants to know, is Content Aware fairly easy to use?
Yes. Yes. Yeah. And there's different, they've made it so complex now. There's different ways to use it too. Now they've got a whole nother interface that pops in, but you can just literally select it and right click, hit fill, and then Content Aware, and it'll calculate it without having to go into that dialog box, which I think is a little more confusing. Do we have time for one more?
We have time for one more.
Okay. I wanted to show you guys how to do the pano. So this is a pano shot that I took in Glacier. Now, if you've never tried to do one of these, I highly recommend it. You don't necessarily need a tripod to do it. You just need a steady hand. And when you take your shot, you want to take your images, going across, so you can go up and down. And you want to have about 20% overlap in the image. So, overlapping 20% from one image to the next. And generally, you want at least 5 shots. Let's see how many I would have. 7. All right. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to select them all. I hit Command A on my keyboard. I'm right clicking and then open in Camera Raw. All right. Now I'm hitting Command A again, and I right click, and then I select Merge to Panorama. Now let's take some minute while it thinks. Now, here we go. So we have different projections that we can choose from. There's spherical, cylindrical, and then perspective. And you can just look through them and figure out which one you like best. I like this one the best, so I'm going to work with that. Now you can play with the boundary warp. So if you just drag this, you're going to see your image kind of grow, which is cool. I'm gonna rock it all the way. Now you have options down here as far as workflow, apply auto settings. Again, this is going to be just doing some tweaking to your edit, and I leave it on because you can always change it. And then auto crop I leave on, and then just hit merge. And again, it's going to create a DNG file, and you hit save. And so there we have an image with 7 images stacked together. And the neat thing about doing these is, let's say you're out and you have a wide angle and you take this same shot, right? You get home and you look at it and the mountains look tiny, right? But if you were to shoot with something like, let's say, a 35 or a 50, and you got these shots, and then you were able to put them all together, well, then you don't lose the grandness or the scale of the mountain. So I like to do these when I remember. I'm just going to bring the shadows up a little bit, and maybe my blacks a little bit. And there we have a panorama stitched together. It was super easy.
Love doing panoramas. Okay. I'm going to say last call for questions. And were you done with this one, Beth?
Yeah.
I'm going to get you to take your screen down and let's see if we got any questions in here. Lydia asked a little earlier, do you ever shoot landscape photos using focus stacking? So she's just learning and she's curious.
Yes, I do focus stack from time to time, but a lot of times I don't have I actually do it quite a bit in the field, but then when I go home to edit them, I don't have the patience for it. But you guys were all talking about Olympus cameras, and I actually just bought one myself and shows all that inside of it. It's incredible. So I'm gonna play with that.
It's like magic.
It is.
I guess Vicky must have come in a little late. She's just now learning editing and she's pretty good at it. She's getting pretty good at photography, but she's just now learning editing. So what program are you using?
I use Adobe Camera Raw and then Photoshop.
Yeah. Okay. Let's see here. Okay, this leads into Ariel's question. Do you have any Photoshop classes that you offer?
I do. I've got one coming up in May. I have the link. I'll throw the link into
chat
here.
All right. I don't see any other questions. Let's see. Last call. There it is. All right. So there's a link in there if you're interested. I screenshot it if you can, or take a picture with your cell phone because I know your cell phone's real close. So Vicky is just getting ready to buy a mirrorless camera. Do you have any recommendations for her? Let me ask you this, Vicky. What kind of stuff are you shooting?
Yeah, I think that's a better question. Is what are you shooting?
Yeah. Nature and wildlife.
And landscapes.
Okay.
What's your budget? What's your budget? Is maybe
the question. The real question is, what's your budget? So, do you do much wildlife, Beth, other than kids?
Yeah, no, I do. I just don't have a lot of patience for it.
Yeah.
But I shoot Sony, so I have a Sony full frame. I have the A7 IV, and I just bought the Olympus camera. So that's a whole new thing to me. I don't really know what I'm doing with it yet, but I think Sonys are a good brand, and really any of them now are amazing. There's be such a difference in like, because Sony was the first mirrorless that came out, and they were really leading that, but now it's like everyone's making them and they all take incredible images, really.
Right. And it goes back to her. She's asking for eye tracking. So there are wildlife photographers in this room. Ben Cowan's in here. I'm trying to think. So I'll say for eye tracking for the Nikon Z9 is pretty damn sweet. For Canon shooters, I shoot with people that teach wildlife photography. They do lead workshops. Most of them cannot put down their R5. They will sleep with it if they get a chance. I don't know about Sony.
Yeah, it has eye tracking.
Yeah. So what I would recommend is that you go to your local camera store and ask them, show me what you've got that has eye tracking, and put those cameras in your hands, especially if budget's not an issue for you. I shoot the Z9. It's a heavy camera, so these are things that you're spending a lot of money. So I would take the time to hold them and see if you can handle them. Most of those cameras are going to be great for landscape. They're going to be great for nature. It goes back to all these cameras are really so far advanced. They're smarter than I am. So I don't think you're going to go wrong. I think you just need to look at, how's it fit in your hand? I've got big man hands, so a Nikon fits great. Whereas the little Sonys and the Olympus, they're so tiny. I I can't hold them. So that's what I would recommend. Questions are coming through here really fast. So I think she's getting a lot of advice from other people. I know I just saw this from Linda in here, and she's got a great advice. You can rent them. Go rent a camera for a weekend and play with it before you make a commitment. It's like, pre-dating.
I would make sure you get a full frame camera versus a crop sensor camera, especially if your wildlife is your focus, just because then you get bigger files.
Yeah. It does let you crop down and you still have that really beautiful. Yeah. So you still have a lot of pixels to work with.
Yeah.
All right. Well, with that, Beth, I think I can close out your session and say thank you for coming on and sharing what you know. And I think that, editing is one of those topics that there's so many different ways to do to get what you need done. It's just, what did you first learn, and what's easy for you. So it's always really nice to listen to someone else's workflow, because I was taught by this person, and you listen to enough people and you hang out with a lot of different photographers. Everybody's got a different way to do something, and it's pretty cool. So if something sticks, it's even more valuable to you as you proceed, start building on your skill set. So, but I appreciate you coming on, and
thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that we had a great crowd in here tonight, and for that's just really that just thrills me. So, all right. You guys can connect with Beth through her website, intothewildwego.photography. And on Instagram, if you're on Instagram, give her a follow at intothewildwego. I'd check out if you're into workshops or classes, go to her website. Again, that was intothewildwego.photography. So next week, cinematographer Chris Burke is going to be here to present cinematography intro to narrative storytelling. So until next time, go out and create something beautiful. And I hope that we see you again soon.